Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Los Angeles, California, United States of America. Here on March 28th, 2021. Today I'd like to share with you an important experience that I've had years back with Aung San Suu Kyi when she was first released from 6 years of house detention, incarcerated by a dictator in the country of Myanmar, Burma. It's an important story. She cannot speak for herself today. Although we hear her, we hear the people. Allow me to take my time. May I invite you to please, if there's a chance to relax, to breathe together, to make this shared experience through time and space, a meditation, if you will, on the attributes of peaceful, engaged revolution, the quality of metta or loving kindness, compassion, karuna, mudita, sympathetic joy, upekkha, some form of equilibrium within the horror. Wisdom, understanding that we're in an ocean of dukkha or suffering. The Dhamma itself, the Dharma, the attributes of cognitive intelligence meant to uproot, attenuate the kilesa, the unconscious, often, states of mind of greed, anger, and delusion, that if immersed in, we live life through those horrible filters that result in atrocities that we see all over the world and the horrors that we see in Burma today. On the courage to care, a phrase that I learned from Aung San Suu Kyi. Allow me to take my time. And if you're motivated, may I encourage you to be a force multiplier, to share this talk worldwide, wherever you can. Encourage people to share it. Perhaps like yourself, a lot of my adult life, my Dhamma life as an adult, has been, on the one hand, very aware of this quality of violence. It's a very benign term to use it as language. But if someone were to insult us, we understand the pain of that insult, especially if it's someone we respect. If someone were to harm us, we understand the pain of that assault. If someone were to take something precious of ours, we understand the loss. If we were to perceive a deep intimacy where the individual was raped and tortured, it would be almost unimaginable to deal with that level of suffering in relationship to the word violence. We think throughout human history, stating the obvious, but often normalized simply as print on a piece of paper in a textbook about history, the overlapping genocides all throughout recorded history. Unimaginable to perceive the horror of 800,000 Rwandans being macheted, bayoneted, persecuted, beheaded. Barely a footnote in human history. We think of the atrocities in the former Yugoslavia with the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, the institutional gang raping of women as a war crime. Few remember the massacre and genocide in East Timor. Impossible to unravel the horror of the Third Reich and calculated mass extermination of deplorables. Gays, trans, Jews, Catholics, trade unionists, people, you and me, our relatives. 800 billion people, it said, have lived on this planet before us. Many people today are talking about us being the last generation, or perhaps the next generation being the final, before the conclusion of what's been labeled as the sixth mass extinction generated by the addiction and the ignorance of the human being, the Homo sapien. In our fetish, our blind consumption to kill nature, somehow animals and birds and fish are incarnations for humans to kill and to massacre and to factory farm to feed our desire for flesh. From a sensitive heart point of view, from the animal's point of view, it's a horror. It's an incalculable extermination of life. We treat the environment as if it was here simply to be devoured and to be clear-cut. We're at the precipice. Some speak of being over the cliff. That there is no redemption for the greed, the anger, the delusion, the projection of the human entity all over the planet. In our drive towards self-annihilation, quoting a homicidal economy, that all of us have our hands on the wheel and our foot on the gas pedal, participating in mass extermination, and within that context of catastrophic environmental collapse, and with it mass starvation, a dystopian landscape, unimaginable, where perhaps you and me and friends that we know and family may end up in cannibalism. Such was the Buddha's first noble truth, of the truth of suffering. We all know this in language. We hear the word violence over and over again. We hear and see the images in Burma today of unthinkable atrocities. And I look at the video and I imagine the Buddha talking to me, and I imagine me interpreting these in teachings of the Buddha as the first noble truth. Young man Alan Clements, dukkha is a pervasive universal law. It's horrible to get sick and without medicine to suffer malaria, dengue, cholera. Imagine without a dentist or Novocaine to have an unthinkable infection in one's tooth. The agony would drive one crazy. To be pierced in the heart slowly with a knife is beyond comprehension. The interrogations that go around the world today in the silence of the scream in prison camps, interrogating people. The truth of suffering was what drove me to Myanmar. The truth of dukkha, the Buddha's first acknowledgement that there are all forms of very discernible physical sufferings. All human beings, all animals, perhaps trees too, all life will understand quite intimately and immediately the truth of the most obvious form of dukkha, dukkha. Physical. And then there's mental dukkha, which we all know from forms of torment and anguish. How many of us have avoided rejection by someone we care about, we want to be with, and we love? These forms of torment, we all are born into a tapestry, to state the obvious, but we often neglect and normalize this tapestry and this denial. And we anesthetize this dukkha through denial and projection and blame and anger. But if we open the heart and feel into this deeper form of dukkha, mental states of anguish, just think right now, if we were just to pause in this sharing from a long way from the front lines of the civil disobedience movement in Burma, to enter the mind state of those who are grieving, the rupture of normalcy based upon this horrible, violent military coup d'etat that's moved into a terrorist organization known as MASAC, that is mercilessly persecuting, torturing, interrogating, beating, raping, sniping, slicing, unbridled horror, creating a tsunami, a convulsive ocean of torment in Burma. Not the only state of mind, but the second form of dukkha. The dukkha of anguish. And how easy it is as human beings to distance ourselves from it over there. We normalize it. And it's a treacherous path for me to embark upon a life of feeling more intimately, a highly pixelated sensibility of the heart to empathize, pause, empathy, the capacity, the choice of human being to feel another being as himself, herself. I am reluctant to even encourage it. It's hard enough to feel one's own being and to empower a sense of connectivity to the few people we call friends and family, lover. And how easy it is to separate from empathy as soon as we've been so-called violated. Empathy is closed like an iron curtain. And then we go into the plausible excuse of hiding our revenge and our blame and our anger. Look at the amount of hate that goes around the world today. And it's normalized. Hate has become normal. Violence has become normal. Or has it? The second form of dukkha, the mental state of anguish and torment and anxiety and stress, and to feel these things and not to collapse. Thus, those who pursue the journey of Dhamma, bhavana, mind training, mindful intelligence to engage these complex states of consciousness, to transform them into a higher radiance. Beautiful, right? We know that. How difficult it is to do. The third form of dukkha in this first noble truth of the Buddha's Dhamma, a very difficult form of suffering, simply the dukkha of anicca, or oscillation. Nothing, as it's been said, as we could feel into this moment right now, together, breathing across time and space, a digital highway, photons and neurons, biological arteries that connect our own body with our own organs, inseparable from the ecosystem and each other, but yet do we feel this deep interplay of photonic and biological and atomic interconnectedness. Obviously, we all breathe the same oxygen. But this deeper sense of anicca, or impermanence, and deep inseparableness, my Lord, we all know it. All things are temporary. None of us have a guarantee that the very next moment will not be our last in-breath. How many times I've sat with nuns and monks and myself and other brothers and sisters in monasteries, in forest enclaves, in retreats around the world, talking about the evanescence of being, and to pause and to feel that. And how we so radically deny anicca, impermanence. Yet if we were to feel that, just think of the amount of sacred space that would be created if we are in the face of our love, in the heart of our beloved, ourselves and our intimates, in-breath, out-breath, in-breath, out-breath. I learned to be more acquainted with the intimacy of my breathing based upon the monks and the nuns and the lay teachers and the lay sangha in Myanmar, in Burma. In-breath, out-breath. It took speed out of my life. It took the drive to the future as preferable to this moment now, and I'm not going to glorify it. But here I've learned that mindfulness and the intelligence of mindfulness had the capacity to thaw my own consciousness, my own psyche, my own sense of interrelated identity, thaw it unfreeze it, unparalyze it, denumb it from callousness, from insensitivity, from delusions, from addictions, and just the capacity to feel. When I think about what's going on in Burma today, if I were to have a wish, it would be for a day of mindful grieving on both sides, like the Christmas truce in the World War, where both sides called a truce to pick up the dead bodies. And unbeknownst to both sides, they began to celebrate and exchange addresses that after the war let us connect. Intrinsically a brethren and a sisterhood when the gun was put down to pick up dead bodies to bury them because they couldn't even see each other as enemy. How epic, how archetypal. And yet we've so normalized. This is the very thing that I'd like to drive home in my own heart today and share it. For 7 months I've been here in Los Angeles, gifted in this home, chosen to be alone, to write and to feel the ultimate question of my life. 50 years ago I left this very town of Santa Monica in Venice to ordain as a monk, to at least go to India and to Burma to see if I could pursue the monastic order. And here I am 50 years later. Tens of thousands of hours of meditation and mindfulness and chanting and fasting. And I really asked myself, what really matters? Why stay alive? And for 7 months I dove deep into my own heart to answer the question in the face of the mass extinction, in the face of genocide, in the face of the incarceration of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, and the incredible killing of my people in Burma and around the world, all these countries right now screaming. Do you hear us screaming? Not just Myanmar. Do you not hear the Buddha's First Noble Truth screaming throughout eternity, in all quarters of the cosmos, by all living creatures, in all dimensions, screaming out with the torment of dukkha, the 3 dimensions of suffering? Do you not hear it, Alan? Have you not heard it deeply enough to turn away from all forms of suffering and seek the highest form of release known in the Buddhist Pali language as Nibbana, the great extinction of greed, anger, and delusion? That made so much sense. And yet, what intrigued me about meeting Daw Aung San Suu Kyi was that there was this radical integration of timeless principles of awakening and a deep rootedness in the Buddha's 4 Noble Truths, and an intimate willingness to feel the 3 dimensions of dukkha in the First Noble Truth, but at the same time to apply the freedom from suffering to include an 8-fold path called revolution without violence. And that really intrigued me, and it intrigues me today even more than 26 years ago when I first met Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. The revolution is obviously continuing. The Spring Revolution, the civilian dialogue movement, the civil disobedience movement, the modernization of the Sangha and the weaponization of metta and karuna and dhamma, a much more potent form of these timeless states of mind in dynamic action to transform from culture, society. Those who are impervious, seemingly, to an understanding of the 4 Noble Truths, to Dhamma, and to the 3 dimensions of dukkha. In fact, the perversity that we watch around the world, that we see on film, and you know firsthand being in Burma, the perversity of men, primarily men, soldiers and police, and yet women too who are colluding, and women who are in the military, the perverse delight in harming, in killing, in beating, and torturing. And it right there, you wonder, can anything be done about that interface of perversity and the normalization and the addiction to evil? Devilish behaviors, right? Peta-like behaviors. And the heart is broken, it's staggered, and you just want to clench your fist and to rise more radiantly in a more, violent response. You can see right there the justification to deal with violence. And I'd like to interweave my time with Aung San Suu Kyi when I asked her about these questions, these timeless, epic questions, not to turn away from the suffering and not to engage the suffering with more suffering. Thus, this revolution of the spirit that she and her colleagues back in 1988 and 89, prior to their incarceration, developed the concept of a revolution of human consciousness. A Václav Havel phrase, an ally of Dawsu's. And that is a synonym for my understanding of Dhamma, of meditation, of mindful intelligence applied to the interface of consciousness and form in context. Mindfulness placed within consciousness, within form, within context, within all circumstances, with the intelligence to overcome one's own engagement with greed, anger, and delusion, and to confront the evil with what I would call today weaponized mindfulness, weaponized compassion, weaponized metta, weaponized mudita, weaponized engaged equanimity, weaponized intelligence. And right there, I try to really feel into my mentors, friends, and teachers. What would Mahasi Sayadaw say to me in this conversation today? What would the Buddha say to you and me right now if he were alive and coming through our own consciousness? How can we hear what's right? How do we know what to do? Sayadaw U Pandita, speak to me. Every day I sit and walk in this house for 7 months, trying to psychically, intuitively engage the timeless intelligence of Dhamma, like my blood, like your blood, an interrelated network of arteries in the Dhamma, the timeless teachings of Dhamma. What is right action? And when I went right into the core of this, the very soul of Nibbana as a living experience, a radiating light, not a final state, but a living, abiding, transformational, unconditional conviction in the overcoming of violence. If there's one attribute that I so respect, is truthfully infused harmlessness. Someone who is willing to engage their restraint from violence and use the power of their heart, their voice, their conscience, their dignity to help me understand what I don't see. The civil disobedience movement in Burma, nonviolence all around the world. The wisdom of truthful, infused, harmless engagement, the weaponization of Dhamma. That is the primordial task of all life. To me, when I get into my more satirical comedic routine, which I've written a book about this, it's called Extinction X-Rated. It will be hated because it just peels back the lies in the most blunt way possible, as if there's never going to be a tomorrow in my life. And I wrote it with that life and death interest. And if you're easily provoked, or if you haven't ever understood suicidal ideation, never been addicted to pharmaceuticals or drugs, don't buy it, don't read it, spare yourself. But the provocation for those who want to read what I've written, it's coming out any day now, it really is how to end the tyranny of murder and rape and violence. How close can we get to the abyss, the darkness, and refuse to participate in it? Isn't that the edge on every bullet that's going into the head of every boy and girl in Myanmar and around the world right now? How do you stop the bullet with Dhamma intelligence? How do you get into the mindset of the assassin with weaponized compassion? The epic battle of good and evil. That's what drove me to the Buddha's teaching and meditation. Only by oneself can one remove dukkha. We can lead each other to the river. We can cry together. And as much as we want to love and to care, we have to initiate right effort to engage these innate kilesas, to state the obvious, right there. How do we encourage those who are blind or obedient or who have normalized their anger, their rage, their obedience to propaganda, to call peaceful protesters for democracy demons and villains? How do we question our own tyranny, our own dictatorship, the meme of totalitarianism? Right there at the interface of I and you, that's where that cognitive terrain, the Christmas truce during the war, there's so much death right there at that confluence. Imagine how many human beings in all dimensions, all devas, all brahmas, all petas. Think of all the carnage. The oceans are filled with tears, the Buddha said, with blood of people, you and me and relatives being killed and beheaded based upon the tyranny of delusion. What can we bring there? And Daw Aung San Suu Kyi said, we bring a revolution of the human mind. This is not new. When I first met her, I was introduced to her by my longtime friend, the former general under Ne Win, who renounced dictatorship and was incarcerated, was a monk, U Tinu. I remember sitting in Daw Su's house in Rangoon. And we talked about the book. We talked about the conditions. We made an agreement that each conversation would be our first and last, never knowing what would happen minute to minute. And the agenda was simple. Ask the most important question first, and then the next most important question second, and let us have a succession of conversations and dialogues based upon the priority of the question and the answer in the dialogue. So that no matter what happens, we're at the peak first and work down. What is the most important question you would like to ask me, Alan? I said, the question that I would like to ask you, Sue, is what in essence do you mean by a revolution of the spirit? You use it as a phrase to describe your nonviolent struggle for freedom and democracy in challenge to totalitarianism and dictatorship. You call it a revolution of the Spirit. And she said to me that ever since I was released from my detention, I never thought of myself as being unfree. Yes, I was locked into my home, locked into my compound, and most of the luxuries were severed. But I was never unfree under detention. And when the gate to my front door was unlocked, I walked to the locked gate of 54 University Avenue, where I grew up here in Rangoon, and stood on a stool and simply looked over the gate onto University Avenue. We all know this. And cars were going by, and there was a sense of disbelief that there stood Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. She did the same thing the following Saturday, and the same thing at the same time the following weekend. And slowly people began to see that Daw Suu actually had been unchained from inside of her home. And on a regular basis now, she was revealing herself to the people, that the revolution of the Spirit never stopped. And people gathered. And just as it is today, in present time, March 28, 2021, in Burma, Myanmar, a crime against the terrorist organization Masak to gather in groups of more than 5, and even one in many cities around the country, in many townships and villages, even a young girl bathing, likely runs the risk of a sniper bullet through her head or her heart. A crime against the state. State-sanctioned terrorism. 1995, 2021. And people gathered. First there were 5, 10, 100. I came. And she said, you were out on the street with the people who dared to come out of their home and defy the military edict, the terrorist organization's decree that it's a crime and you could be punished. You will be punished. You will lose your home. You will lose your money. We will take your wife, your children. We will put you into insane prison. We will interrogate you with a dark bag over your head. We'll beat you with the butt of a rifle. We'll whip you and slice you and put you down on broken glass. We'll kick you and starve you and deprive you of food and medicines, and then we'll kick you into a gulag, and we'll forget that you exist because you came out and defied the military edict of gathering in groups larger than 5. And she said to me, a timeless expression, said, that takes courage. I mean, I would like to just invite, well, you and me, all of us, to feel, truly feel as best as we can into the radiance, the nurturing radiance of courage, and allow it to be breathed into our own lungs. The fortitude, the resilience, the dynamic determination, the courage, all these attributes that we can describe to talk about a patient determination in the face of dukkha or suffering. a patient, engaged, weaponized karuna or compassion in the face of evil, blame, torture. Think of that interface, that epic confluence of Dhamma in revolutionary action with evil that's going on every day, every hour in Myanmar today. And that is the civil disobedience movement, right? That's Daw Su's call for a revolution of the spirit. You were there, Alan. These people came out, and that took courage. You ask about the essence of a revolution of the spirit. Courage. And then she said, it's the courage to care about things larger than your own self-interest. You're in your home, you're going about your business, there's Masak, the tyranny, the assassinations, the brutality, the protesters, and you decide to go about your normal business of integrating and normalizing fear and terror into your own home and not even daring to open the window or go out. And yet your heart is filled with support for the protesters and the civil disobedience movement. But you dare not join the protest. Nun, monk, child, adult. So she told me that you must have not only courage to leave your house, your courage must be co-joined with caring for other people that you may not even know. We're part of a democracy struggle. Our freedom is inseparable from the freedom of others. What we're doing today may not even be seen as beneficial to our own lives. In fact, we may even suffer. We may lose people. We may lose our home. We may lose our money. We may be tortured. We may die. We may lose friends. And she told me that it's for the freedom of others in the future. May not even be in my lifetime, she said, that we see really true democracy. And so when you ask me about the essence of a revolution of the spirit, it's the courage to care about things larger than your own self-interest. And then she said, this is a very important thing for me to have learned and heard from her and her colleagues, is that it's inappropriate thinking to think that you're in your house, you're in your flat, you're in your place of, your abode, and you don't wait to feel fearless to enact the courage to care, to come out, to join, to participate in your own unique way with the revolution of the spirit, also known as the civil disobedience movement. You learn to mindfully, this was Sayadaw U Pandita's phrasing, her teacher and my teacher, the great Dhamma teacher and meditation giant in Burma, and the heir to the Mahasi system, the Mahasi Sayadaw monastery in Rangoon, the late Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita, a real easily misunderstood maverick, rebel, traditional Dhamma giant. To quiver, learn to mindfully quiver. This is a very interesting way to look at mindfulness rather than a kind of flat mirror-like perception of phenomena. That mindfulness has the capacity to feel, but without the prejudice of what feeling should feel like. Imagine what the feeling of quivering would feel like. Quivering with compassion, Sayadaw U Pandita said. And Daw Su reminded me of the phrase, to come out onto the streets and gather, to protest, to defy military edicts of torture or imprisonment or both, if you gather in groups of 5 or more, we must learn to co-join with our fear, our anticipation of harm, death, and loss, murder, and tragedy. We must learn to quiver. I don't know what the Pali word is for this or the Burmese word, but to quiver with freedom. We don't wait to be fearless. We co-join our mindfulness with the fear, and we act, she said, despite the fear. We learn to quiver with the fear. We learn to quiver with compassion. We learn to quiver with loving kindness. We need to quiver with our mindfulness. We quiver with freedom. We shake, we cry, right there. Releasing ourselves from the confinement of prediction, from conformity. What does it really look like to be a Dhamma rebel, a Dhamma revolutionary, a revolutionary of the spirit? What does it mean to come unglued from the fixation of ideals and normal behaviors and just let it out and scream out loud in the naturalness of an uncontrived quivering of revolutionary freedom, and get so close to the evil of other. The epic warrior with the epic devil, right there. Burma right now, I've never ever seen anything so epically, profoundly inspiring than these people, you in Burma, all throughout the country, courageously willing, knowingly you're going to be shot, likely shot, wounded, killed, maimed, doctors, nurses, medics, young children. And there you are, quivering in your Dhamma, in your revolutionary spirit, quivering in freedom in the face of evil. Wow. And then Dasu said, courage can be known by 3 words. See the truth of a circumstance. The civil disobedience movement and many world leaders, they see the truth of what is happening in Burma. And we have appropriate responses to the first of the 3 elements of courage to care about things larger than our own self-interest. You see it, but then to feel it, to internalize it. This is a very challenging trajectory to move from the idea of knowing it's wrong, the truth of the injustice, to the trajectory of internalizing it and having the capacity to breathe into the truth of what you see, the injustice, the evil, the horror, and equally breathing into the courage to care. And this is where most fail. I think women know this far better than men. This normally feminine-inspired quality, the capacity of the human heart to not be afraid of feeling the truth of a situation. And then she went on to say that although we see the truth and we feel the truth, it's not enough just to feel. Life is about actions. And actions come momentarily based upon decisions. We're always at a primordial crossroad to see the truth or to deny it, to feel the truth or to deny it. And that primordial, epic scent of this way or that way, decision-making at the crossroads of existence and eternity, where we decide either to live an ethical, moral, just life at that crossroad, or we choose to live in complicity with fear, or we choose to annihilate those who want to live in freedom. that crossroad. To feel is not enough. And the people of Burma know this better than me, because you are compelled and you are inspiring us to what Daw Su said as the next dimension of the revolution of the spirit, the courage to care about things larger than one's own self-interest, to see the truth, to feel the truth, and to act. And action isn't just one act. An ongoing momentum, a building of weaponized Dhamma, a weaponized revolution of the heart, a weaponized courage to care so viciously and so determinedly that you will not give up in your repeated actions to do what you feel is right over and over and over and over again. And slowly, the momentum of see, feel, act builds as a revolutionary spirit. And she concluded in this first meeting, this in essence is the meaning of the civil disobedience movement. This in essence is the meaning of a revolution of the spirit, to see, to feel, and to act. Putting truth into dynamic, peaceful confrontation with violence and evil. It was a non-violent struggle. It seems to be, in many ways, still rooted deeper in peace, non-violent, intense engagement with the evil of the terrorist group Ming Online and his state administration council, the terrorist organization now in Burma known as MASAC. It is no longer an armed forces, it's no longer the Thamada, it's no longer men and women in uniform. It is a bona fide terrorist organization, and any day now, world leaders, ASEAN, the United Nations, the EU, the G7, America, Canada, Australia, are going to designate, I do predict, they will designate the obvious. They're a little bit late in the game, but they're going to designate MASAC as a terrorist organization right alongside with Boko Haram in Nigeria, Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge, Bin Laden's Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban of Burma, MASAC. And Ming Online is not only a criminal with crimes against humanity all throughout his being, and many other men and wives and women in that terrorist group, but he is a bona fide Saddam Hussein, whose only future, if he survives, is to immediately flee to China or to Russia. And I wouldn't be surprised that that's really what he's doing right now, looting the country and going out in a blaze of horror. See, feel, act. Alan, if enough people in our country of Burma have the courage to care about things larger than our own self-interest, learn the dynamic, I would call it Dhamma art, of engaging mindful intelligence to learn how to consciously quiver with kusala states of mind, courage, truthfulness, determination, not fearlessness, appropriate action, compassion, right under. Quivering here is to take the prediction, the conformity, the idea off of the emotion. Quivering is a synonym for courage in dynamic development. It's not going to be easy to come out of one's own home and flat. It's not going to be easy for a military assassin to put down the gun. Learning how to mindfully, intelligent, courageously engage, on the one hand, one's own unrecognized kilesa, denigrating states of consciousness, greed, anger, and delusion, and all the various variations on those three states of mind. It's a rare individual who sees and feels those states of mind, greed, anger, and delusion, and totalitarianism and evil. They don't see them as dukkha. They don't feel them as dukkha. They infuse them with blame and appropriateness, and that's another form of a deeper river of ignorance. Those on the civil disobedience movement side know that it's wrong. They want to be responsible to not participate in their own kilesa. It's a Dhamma revolution. It's a spiritual revolution. This is why Dasu and all the people near her and today call it a revolution of the spirit, a word that encompasses all religions in their most high fidelity sense of beauty, of sacredness, right there. The empowerment of the sacred in the face of evil. It's a biblical fight. It's a Dhamma revolution. It's the timeless struggle in samsara to overcome kilesa. You are fighting a frontline battle in Burma, and I know in many other places around the world. It is an epic experience to witness from the outside. What a gift you are giving to activate all of us connected to you in Dhamma, connected to you in democracy, connected to you in the oxygen of freedom. We are being vitalized by watching, feeling, and getting closer and closer to our own choice of actions to belong to this revolution of the spirit that has now gone global. Thank you, Burma. Thank you, Myanmar. Thank you, civil disobedience movement. Now, please allow me to conclude today's sharing with another, I feel, very complex quality of consciousness: empathy. I'm not going to use the word compassion, except sparingly. My understanding of empathy is a mental, emotional, cognitive, psychological condition, an inner condition of being. I would say it's probably in every mind. Some have more access to it than others. That allows you to feel me. And not just feel. I would call it to, bear with me here, this is an edge, to transmigrate from my own ecosystem of selfhood, where 99% of all my thought and behavior is about me, sustaining me, bathing me, feeding me, taking care of me. Yes, I care about other people, but outside of a few, it's a stretch to feel the empathy of all those animals being factory farmed right now, in bleeding and screaming. To empathize with all the millions of acres around the world being clear-cut right now in the agony of our forests. To empathize with the fish in the oceans and the acidification of them and the ongoing heating of our atmosphere. To feel, to empathize with all the humans out there, you and me, doing what we do, the fetish for consumerism. Not easy. I get like this, contract. The idea of feeling empathy for an assassin, you want to kill him. The empathy towards a terrorist, you want to not kill him, you want to just slap them and imprison them, and you just want them to cough up the ugly pus of their belligerent stupidity. There's no satisfaction. But empathy isn't about revenge, right? That's why it's so difficult. I can't even imagine even what it must be in the epic crucifixion of our beloved Jesus, looking down upon men and women bargaining, selling his valuables, his clothes. You, Mr. Son of God, get yourself off this cross. Who among us can say, they know not what they do? Empathy. I just can't imagine the parents of these children who've been shot. I can't imagine being the wife and the husband, the uncle, the father, the grandparent of those tortured and imprisoned. I tried to be in the body of this young man yesterday. You've all seen it who watch Burma and the films that are being circulated. Repeatedly beaten, kicked, viciously kicked. 6, 7, 8, 10 men in uniform with guns. Those guns came from Western countries, Asian countries. Those men were trained to kick and to beat with the butts of their rifles. They're believing what they're doing in their viciousness of those kicking. And I'm seeing that situation. It is beyond me to empathize. Put myself, Alan, in the body of that man. I bring this up because, you know, the civil disobedience movement was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and there's a part of me that wanted to think, you know, bear the language, but screw you. Where's the right to protect here? Don't give me a prize on paper, man. We want, you know, where's that aircraft carrier that Alan keeps going on about from the South China Sea going around the Strait of Singapore into the Andaman Sea and painting 3 fingers on its flight deck? Where are you, man? Where are you, Mr. Biden? Where are you, Mr. Trudeau? I don't want a Nobel Prize. We want the right to protect us. You know, we want to live. Where's your empathy, right? If I were to be in a room right now with President Biden and his followers and his handlers, I truly would lose it and scream, where is your empathy? Put yourself in the body of this video and explain to me how you prioritize other things than to send that aircraft carrier to the Andaman Sea and to fund and to provide food and medical support and moral stealth for the civil disobedience movement and multiply, multiply, multiply. Empathy, right? So the civil disobedience movement, as I see it and what Dasu is telling me about a revolution of the spirit, is about the capacity to evoke, evolve, see, feel, and act with this quality of consciousness known as empathy.